Ads everywhere. What do you got there, son?
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share the story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
I'm Elford Stephens, video game enthusiast.
Hi, I'm Phil Thomas. I'm relatively new to video gaming, so you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
And I'm Ryan Weaver. I'm a lifelong gamer. On this episode, because I'm an avid GTA player, I've played every single one, and I still play it today.
Today, we're looking at the history of perhaps the most famous or infamous mod in gaming history, one that relates to Grand Theft Auto. It's the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas Hot Coffee mod. Is anyone familiar with the Hot Coffee mod?
I never played it myself, but I do remember when it happened, and it was all over the place, people talking about it.
I'm not all that familiar with it.
I heard it wasn't about hot coffee.
It starts by talking about coffee.
It does. Developed and released in 2005, Hot Coffee was a mod for Grand Theft Auto San Andreas that unlocked a hidden sex-based minigame that was left in the game's code, which a whole bunch of people got hot and bothered by. It has everything you want in a controversy. It's got hubris. It's got moral outrage. It's got shady business practices and so many lawsuits. So buckle up for a fun story. Patrick Wildenborg was born in the Netherlands in 1969. His family first got a computer when he was 15, and like many teens in the 80s, Wildenborg used it for playing games. As an adult, he used his experience as a springboard into a computing career, studied computers in college, and eventually earned a master's degree in computer science in 1995 from the University of Twente. After college, he worked as a software engineer for several different firms. Now, for the most part, Wildenborg saw himself as a casual gamer. That changed with the release of Grand Theft Auto Vice City. As he explained to a Eurogamer reporter in 2012, quote, "I came to Grand Theft Auto relatively late. Sometime after the release of Vice City, I borrowed the game from a friend. Perhaps it was the setting and the music, or perhaps it was the humor and action. Whatever the reason, I found the game hugely attractive," end quote. Wildenborg tore through the game, completing the main storyline, then all the side missions, followed by earning all the collectibles on his way to 100%ing the game. And conquering all the game's challenges left Patrick hungry for more. So he decided to make some of his own, blending his love of GTA with his career as a software engineer by becoming a GTA modder. Among his notable accomplishments was Marina Car Park, a Vice City mod that allowed players to buy a car park where they could store up to 40 cars. Just before I continue, because we're going to be talking a lot about game modding, can anybody tell me what modding is? Like, as a short description.
Modding is the process of using tools that can be applied to certain games and platforms to take elements of a game and combine them or alter them in ways that the game creator did not intend. And these could be using some sort of utility to give your character special powers early, or to create new maps, or to somehow alter or jailbreak the game.
That's a good description. One of the big things that distinguishes console gaming from PC gaming is that with PC, you still have some access to the source code. So there's a whole community of people that actually make like what we now call DLCs. Like people will make these things for free for PC games. And so they do all sorts of things. In fact, some of the greatest leaps in video games have come from mods that people have created for games.
Yeah, some of them can be equal to, if not better than, what the actual game company is putting out. And those people oftentimes get hired by those companies to work on their next DLC.
Yeah, you all defined it really well, I feel. Modding is about as old as video games. Some of the earliest computer-based games dating back to the 1960s were often modded. But yeah, it's a really fascinating scene. It could be everything as simple as adding a new skin in a game to developing entirely new games based on those assets. So with all the time that Patrick spent on Vice City, you can imagine his excitement in May of 2003 when Sony announced the newest installment in the Grand Theft Auto series, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Developed by Rockstar North and published by Rockstar Games, which was a subsidiary of Take-Two Interactive, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was slated to be the most ambitious game in the series, with a bigger open world than its predecessors, comprising, instead of a city, an entire fictional state. It included more diverse missions and mini-games, smarter NPCs, more vehicles, including bicycles, and most importantly to me, the ability to go in water without dying instantly. With San Andreas, the folks at Rockstar hope to push every possible boundary, technical or otherwise. On July the 14th, 2004, Rockstar co-founder and president Sam Houser sent an email to Jennifer Colby, the company's operations director, in hopes the controversial series could tackle yet another taboo. As Houser explained, quote, "We are keen to include new functionality and interaction in line with the vibe of the game. To this end, in addition to the violence and bad language, we want to include sexual content, which I understand is questionable to certain people, but pretty natural, more than violence when you think about it, and consider the fact that the game is intended for adults," end quote. Houser listed some examples of the kinds of things he wanted to add. I'm quoting these verbatim. Blowjobs, full sex, parentheses, multiple positions. Dildo sex, parentheses, including being able to kill someone with a dildo. Whipping, parentheses, being whipped. Masturbation, parentheses, one of the characters is compulsive. This must be kept. Must is in all caps. Among the items Houser's team planned to include was a minigame connected to the game's new relationship feature. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas allowed players to court one of 6 potential girlfriends, increasing a relationship score by taking these girls out on dates. Once the player reached a certain relationship level, the object of the player's digital affection could invite protagonist Carl C.J. Johnson inside for some coffee in the game's parlance. If the player accepted the invitation for coffee, they entered a rhythm-based minigame where the 2 digital characters have mostly clothed digital sex in various positions while the player pressed buttons to build up an excitement meter. The game also triggered a cutscene of the player's virtual girlfriend going down on him. Houser knew he had just handed Colby a very tall order, yet he remained confident she could make a case for keeping it all in the final version of the game, adding, quote, "I know this is a tricky area, but I want to find a way for this to work. The concept of a glorified shop, Walmart, telling us what we can or can't put in our game is unacceptable on so many levels," end quote. Here I feel the need to briefly offer some context. The thing that Houser was primarily concerned about was that the sex minigame and the other things, the murdering people with dildos and blowjobs and masturbation and all that stuff, might earn Grand Theft Auto San Andreas an AO rating for the Entertainment Software Ratings Board. Are you all familiar with the AO rating?
It's adults only, right? It's equivalent of like an X rating for a video game.
The AO rating dates back to the origins of the ESRB. So when the Entertainment Software Ratings Board was created in 1994, the AO was made, as you said, Ryan, it was the equivalent of the X of the NC-17 rating, identifying content exclusively for people aged 18 and older. AO, in practice, was designed as a financial kiss of death. Major retailers refused to carry AO games. So like Walmart, Circuit City, Best Buy, all of them would not carry AO games. And if you don't have retailers in the 90s and 2000s, you're just not going to sell games. This meant that there was little to no financial incentive to make games that push too far because it risks significantly hobbling a game's potential sales. As a result, want to guess how many AO rated games are in existence?
5.
I was also going to guess 5.
I was going to say less than 5.
It's actually higher, but not that much. 27. Since 1994, as of this recording, there were 27 AO rated titles. The overwhelming majority of games that get an AO rating are for sexual content, bearing such illustrious names as Seduce Me, Playboy, The Mansion, Private Party, All Nude Nikki, and Wet, The Sexy Empire.
Oh, man.
Oh, I assume the video games were, Grand Theft Auto Hot Coffee, Grand Theft Auto 2 Hot Coffee, Grand Theft Auto Vice City Hot Coffee, Grand Theft Auto London 1969 Hot Coffee.
That's a game where you get an STI just by playing it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, my piss burns.
To wear rubber gloves to play that
game. So sexual content is the overwhelming reason why games get an AO rating. Other less common reasons are extreme violence or the inclusion of gambling. Up to that point, past GTA games had been M-rated games, so appropriate for ages 17 and up. However, the potential inclusion of blowjobs, masturbation, and the like put Grand Theft Auto San Andreas at risk of the dreaded AO. Now, Colby, after I mentioned picking up her jaw from the floor, composed a diplomatic response to Houser, explaining they would need to figure out how far they could go without attracting an AO rating and thus alienating the game from about 80% of its potential retailers. Nevertheless, Colby promised to look into it and get back to Hauser. On August the 16th, Terry Donovan, another head at Rockstar who oversaw GTA's marketing, wrote back to Hauser with some bad news. The sex stuff needed to be scaled back, detailing in a 4-page attachment a list of things that needed to go, including the coffee-based minigame. For a game with as much money and hype around it as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, there was too much at stake to risk losing out on the majority of its distribution. Moreover, moral conservatives and opportunistic politicians who already had plenty of issues with the Grand Theft Auto series for all the stuff that was already in those games would have an absolute field day if there were, say, a hidden sex minigame in San Andreas. And that is something in the writing business we call foreshadowing.
I wonder what's going to happen next.
And Hauser was outraged, replying in an email, quote, "This is way, way more than I expected. Not only is it insane to edit comedy like this, look at movies and everything else. To do so is going to be a lot of work and will screw with things. Is this really as far as we can push it? I cannot believe it," end quote. He also took his frustrations further up the corporate ladder, writing to Take-Two chairman Ryan Brandt, quote, "I was pretty shocked by the list. The cuts are everywhere. It doesn't feel like we're pushing any boundaries now. Why bother? I really, really do not want to change this stuff. It feels so wrong at the behest of psychotic Mormon capitalist retailers," end quote. Nevertheless, despite his grumblings, Hauser did relent, explaining in an August the 17th, 2004 email to his team that the sex-based content had to go. This meant no oral sex scene, no BDSM, no killing people with dildos, and no sex minigame.
What about autoerotic asphyxiation or flashing? What about having a suggestive conversation with somebody while holding a hot dog? No?
They saved that for Saints Row.
Yeah, flashing and beating people with dildos is in Saints Row. And streaking. Also streaking, you can streak in that game.
Grand Theft Auto crawled so that Saints Row could run.
Yes, basically.
With the looming late October release date, the offending content had to go in a hurry, potentially concerned that removing the minigame might create problems for other parts of the game, or possibly unable to spend precious work hours cutting it out. Rather than completely remove it from the game's code, Rockstar opted to make the content inaccessible to players. As Hauser later explained in another internal email, quote, "We locked it away because there was no other way to get the game done on time safely. The code is very interwoven in GTA San Andreas, and everything reacts to everything else. The impact of yanking something late is too scary." So in the final version, now when the character's girlfriend invited them up for coffee, the game just triggered a brief cutscene of the outside of the girlfriend's place, accompanied by some brief moaning. Now, closing off but not completely removing a game's content was not an uncommon practice. Features sometimes get scrapped late in development, and it's often cheaper and easier to leave in unused assets in the game's code, wrapping it away from players rather than completely expunging it from the final version. You got to bear in mind, this is in the days before patches for console games. It's like you've got to get it out the door and you can't necessarily scrub all that stuff out. And usually the easiest thing to do is just close it off to other players, because the overwhelming majority of players, unless they're really technical, are never ever going to see it. With the game completed, Rockstar sent its submission package to the Entertainment Software Ratings Board in September. Do you all know how the ESRB rates video games? Like what the process is?
I don't.
I figure two guys like Cisco and Eva would sit in a room. They look at a picture of the cover of the game and they give it 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down.
Just 2 grumpy old guys.
That's even more jaded than my suggestion, Alfred. I was going to suggest that they sit somewhere with like a tape measure next to an eyebrow, and as they're playing the game, however high their eyebrow gets, while doing the content is
Getting very close to an AO there, sir.
Yeah.
We're about to
Bring
reach
that
crisis mode. Crisis mode.
Yeah, that's right.
He's going to break his forehead.
Oh no, somebody let the rock in.
Actually, Elford, yours is actually surprisingly close to what they really do. So the way it works is a couple of months before a game's release, game companies have to send a review package to the ESRB. And the package consists of video footage of the game's most extreme content, which is reviewed by a panel of 2 or 3 raters. And they have a specific criteria. And then the raters then assign the game a letter rating based on its age appropriateness. In those days, when GTA San Andreas was made, the range was from EC, which was early childhood, ages 3 and up, to AO. EC is no longer around anymore. Now it'd just be an E for everyone. Since the sex minigame was, for all intents and purposes, cut content, not designed for public consumption, it wasn't included in Rockstar's ratings package as part of the most extreme content in the game. And so the ESRB didn't see it, and the ESRB assigned the game an M rating like they'd done all the other Grand Theft Auto games before it. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas released for the PlayStation PlayStation 2 on October the 26th, 2004, to massive critical and financial success. It garnered overwhelmingly positive reviews and sold over 5 million copies that year, on its way to becoming the best-selling game ever released for the PS2. You better believe the GTA modding community was excited to get their hands on the game, to open it up and see what was under the hood. And one such modder, who went by the name Barton Waterduck, came across some, let's say, curious files when they dumped it onto the PC. The files appeared to refer to animations they couldn't find anywhere else in the game, with peculiar file names such as sex, kissing, S&M, and blowjobs. Blowjobs spelled with a Z.
Because of course it is.
Several modders, including Patrick Wildenborg, poured over the files and eventually managed to recreate the animations, and they were treated to, as Wildenborg explained in one post on the GTA modding forums, quote, CJ on the pavement, fucking like a rabbit. As Wildenborg and others continued to dig, the signs began to point to a sex minigame hidden in the game's code. However, there was no way to access it because they couldn't alter the game's files. Unless, of course, there was a PC version. Meanwhile, the team at Rockstar North, riding the game's success, were putting together a PC version, as well as a version for the original Xbox. And Hauser remained adamant that they could bring back the sex content, including the Java-themed minigame, into these new versions. And between November and December of 2004, he and his developers explored ways they could restore the game to its former glory. Some ideas considered included unlocking the content on the PC version with a post-release patch, or potentially selling two versions of the game. One is an M-rated version without the sex content, and the other is an AO-rated game with it in. As such, the team ultimately left the content in the code of the PC and the Xbox versions, albeit still inaccessible to players without an extensive technical background. Take-Two sent the new versions to the ESRB for rating in 2005, where it again earned an M rating on its way to a full retail release on June the 7th. And you better believe Wildenborg and the other GTA modders were excited at the chance of unlocking the game's potentially sexy secrets. Possibly to their surprise, the content was still there in the PC version, and Wildenborg managed to develop a mod to unlock it. On June the 9th, 2005, Wildenborg shared his results on the GTA modding site GTA Garage. Borrowing the game's euphemism for sex, alongside its theoretically steamy content, Wildenborg named the mod Hot Coffee. A subsequent version of Hot Coffee allowed players to see the sex minigame play out with nude models, which were also left in the game's code. Wildenborg also eventually released a mod for the Xbox version, and people were eventually able to unlock the content on the PS2 version by using a cheat device. More on how easy it was to do that in a little bit. This caused quite a stir in the gaming community. Many people were understandably skeptical, especially the claim that the minigame was in the game's disk, that it wasn't something that the modders had created, that it was already actually there. After all, there was no way Rockstar would be reckless or stupid enough to hide a sex minigame in GTA, right?
Right?
However, Wildenborg and the other modders involved remained adamant that Hot Coffee only unlocked stuff Rockstar had originally included in the game. On June the 13th, GTA modder Digital D published screenshots and a brief video of the minigame in action on the GTA modding site GTASanAndreas.net with the title, Hot Coffee Bogus? No way. This then attracted the attention of the gaming press. The same day, Kotaku reported on Digital D's post with the headline, GTA Sex Authentic and Unlocked? 4 days later, on June the 17th, Game Politics editor Dennis McCauley published a longer story examining the potential legal ramifications if Rockstar had in fact left the sex minigame in GTA San Andreas. McCauley followed up his initial post with a deep dive into the technical aspects of Hot Coffee on July the 4th, 2005. Since the first article, Wildenborg reached out to McCauley offering to prove the mod's authenticity. Patrick explained in detail exactly how he did it, emphasizing again that his mod only allowed people to access what was already there on the disc. He even offered to do it in front of reporters if people still didn't believe him, explaining in an email, quote, an easier way is to invite me, put me behind a PC with the original GTA San Andreas DVD and a hex editor, and I'll patch the game with you guys as my witnesses. McCauley published the results of their exchanges on Game Politics under the provocative headline, Did Rockstar circumvent the ESRB rating system? Following McCauley's reporting, mainstream news outlets began covering the story, and to put it mildly, Everybody lost their fucking minds. One of my favorite headlines comes from the UK's Daily Mirror, whoever the clear-headed, rational publication ran a story on July the 16th, 2005 with the headline, Grand Theft Porno, Sex Hidden in Top Game. With the lead, quote, the top-selling computer game in the UK has hidden porn children can access with a code from the internet.
I'm pretty sure people got up and ran out to buy the game that day. Sales are up for that quarter.
Ads everywhere. What do you got there, son? See this game you're playing. How do you do this?
Let me take some time by myself to inspect this game.
Yes, son. Why don't you go outside and play, and I'll just have a look at this.
Understandably, people start coming out to denounce this, and one of the earliest public figures to speak up against hot coffee was California State Assemblyman and future convicted arms trafficker Leland Gee.
That's my man right there.
At the time, Yee had a bill working its way through the California legislature that would ban the sale or rental of violent video games to minors. And see our episode on Brown v. EMA for more on that. And the sex minigame seemed to confirm all his worst fears, that video games were warping kids' minds and the ESRB was powerless to stop it. Declaring in a July the 7th press statement, quote, once again, the ESRB has failed our parents. Clearly, the ESRB has a conflict of interest in rating these games, plain and simple. Parents cannot trust the ESRB to rate games appropriately or the industry to look out for our children's best interests. The next day, on July the 8th, 2005, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board announced it was opening an investigation into whether hot coffee showed that Rockstar had earned an M rating under false pretenses. The rationale was that by not disclosing GTA San Andreas' most objectionable content to the ratings board, Rockstar may have deliberately avoided an AO rating. Hot coffee had put the ESRB in a really difficult position. The system had been put in place in 1994 to offset the risk of government regulation. The inclusion of a hidden sex minigame at a time when the industry was battling lawmakers in the courts over whether video games qualify for free speech protection risked destroying everything they had spent the last decade building. Now, in response to the ESRB's announcement, practically every public critic of video games came out of the woodwork to denounce Grand Theft Auto, Rockstar, the ESRB, and video games as a whole. It is like the ESRB blew the doors off of video game Arkham and the entire rogues gallery rolled out for a soundbite. The day of the announcement, David Walsh of the National Institute on Media and the Family issued a national parental alert, warning anyone who would listen to the M-rated Grand Theft Auto San Andreas contained hidden pornographic content. On July the 14th, Hillary Clinton, then a U.S. Senator from New York, argued hot coffee showed video games need to be regulated like a harmful substance like alcohol or tobacco, and demanded the Federal Trade Commission investigate whether Rockstar had, in her words, gamed the system. The same day, fellow U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman demanded Rockstar submit all of the game's code for full independent audit. And if you're going to talk about gaming's rogues gallery, you can't have a moral panic without gaming's clown prince of anti-simulated crime, Mr. Jack Thompson.
Oh, yeah. So what has Jack been up to?
Lawyer, moral crusader, and all-around mature grown-up Jack Thompson leaped into action against hot coffee with his trademark tactics of wild accusations, petty personal feuds, and calling the cops on people. And if it also kept him in the spotlight for the wrongful death lawsuit he just happened to be preparing against Take-Two at that time, well, that was just fine for old Jack. For more on that, check out our 2-part episode on Jack Thompson. Thompson furiously wrote letters to law enforcement officials, including U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzalez, demanding they charge Rockstar, Take-Two, and the CEOs of various retailers with distributing sexual content to minors. On July the 14th, 2005, Jack published an open letter to the Entertainment Software Association, that's the lobbying organization in the video game industry, demanding they fire their president, Doug Lowenstein, on the grounds that he was slow to act against hot coffee, even insinuating that he had tried to cover it up. Thompson also demanded Lowenstein be fired because Doug was mean to him, accusing Lowenstein of engaging in attack dog tactics and ad hominem jihads against Thompson and other critics. But you know what? Jack is not willing to stoop to Doug's level, and he assured the ESA that despite these slights, Jack would never engage in childish name-calling. I'm just kidding. The rest of the letter devolved into an immature personal tirade against Lowenstein, with Jack likening him to Adolf Hitler and calling him, quote, a thug who demonizes critics of your industry's criminal, fraudulent excesses, who, quote, never met a pixelated prostitute he didn't like. Later, he also challenged Lowenstein to a debate, blazing a trail for countless internet cranks for years to come. On August the 8th, Jack literally brought his fight to Rockstar's front door, staging a protest outside their New York headquarters. Accompanying him were members of a DC-based anti-violence group called the Peaceaholics. As a fun aside, the Peaceaholics, before they staged their march with Jack Thompson, published a list of demands to Rockstar. These included that Rockstar promised to only stock its games in adult video stores, create a fund for victims of carjackings and vehicular homicides, and make a national apology for, among other things, causing insurance premiums to skyrocket. I guess because all of the carjackings.
Okay.
For critics like Leland Yee, Hillary Clinton, and Jack Thompson, Hot Coffee confirmed all of their worst fears about the corrupting influence of video games. The fact that it was hidden in the game's code further proved to them that the video game industry was trying to insidiously warp children's minds, and even the ESRB wasn't enough to hold back depraved companies like Rockstar from destroying the moral fabric of society. For moral critics like Leland Yee and Clinton and the like, it was as though Christmas had come early, and Rockstar gave them exactly what they wanted: a smoking gun.
So, Kev, I have a bunch of thoughts. First of all, has someone ever invited you over under the pretext of hot coffee? Like, that has never happened in my life.
Man, me either.
Yeah.
All those missed opportunities as a young man.
You know what I've heard? I have some really cool vine plants in my living room. Would you like to take a look at them? I think I've heard.
You'd like to take a look at my vine plant?
Yeah, they're really interesting. Okay, which is so strange I didn't understand. But anyway. At this point, there are a couple of different things that occur to me as somebody who works on software and someone who, thanks to you, is now aware of some of the themes in these moral panics, which is an easy way to make a name for yourself is to take an oppositional stance to virtually anything that is pushing boundaries in any way whatsoever, so that if they mess up, you can notch a victory.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're, Hillary Clinton or Jack Thompson or an elected member of a state legislature who's actually a gun runner.
On the other side of the spectrum, many gamers rallied to Rockstar's defense. On July the 20th, Wildenborg took down the mod and published a statement on his personal website asserting that while Rockstar did create the content and that it was on the disc, it was only accessible using the mod, that it wasn't something you were going to stumble across while you were playing. And for that, Rockstar actually reached out to him to thank him personally. Admins on gaming message boards shut down threads from people asking for the mod, while others in the gaming community just discouraged people from asking about it. And all that was in showing solidarity with Rockstar. So people kind of rallied around Rockstar over this. Some gamers even thought of running a distraction campaign, perhaps calling attention to one of the other raunchy mods circulating around the internet, such as unblurring the nudity in The Sims 2, or maybe even that ever-elusive Lara Croft nude mod.
I had that Sims mod.
Did you?
I mean, no.
Wait, I didn't know about the Sims thing. So unblurring, was this a mod that I was actually modifying things to make it, or was that in the code as well?
Well, it depends on what you use. You could do like commands in the command line in the game to actually remove the blur, but it was just to look like a Barbie doll. They didn't have like any parts or anything, so you weren't really going to see anything. But then there were mods that added stuff to see.
Hot coffee was a pretty divisive issue in the gaming community. For example, some argued that Rockstar should have disclosed the minigame to the ESRB, even if it was inaccessible content that they would have known full well that modders would have found it sooner or later and should have just been upfront with it. But others pushed back and said that game companies shouldn't be held responsible for what modders do. Inaccessible content is not meant for players. It was not meant to be seen. More than a few called out the hypocrisy of getting upset over a cut minigame involving mostly clothed polygons rubbing up against each other in a game where you can run over pedestrians and murder sex workers to your heart's content.
Yeah.
A few conspiracy-minded observers even thought the whole controversy was a publicity stunt concocted by Rockstar to sell more copies in a bid for outrage-based attention so shameless it would make running with scissors blush.
That conspiracy theory has some legs to it.
I don't know if I believe that about this one. I think they legitimately just wanted to do it, and it's easier to leave it in and lock it off than remove it.
I'm with that too.
Yeah.
I think that they had everything to lose by something like this.
So even though I'm relatively new to video games, I'm not new to software development. And all of you can probably guess that fully fleshed out features are released in code bases to production, to the public all the time, but are just turned off due to one bit of code somewhere. And if that code were to be changed, or that 0 were changed to a 1, you would be able to get to all of that code. Companies might be waiting for some sort of court ruling to be made, or to get a go-ahead from X, Y, or Z person, or are simply waiting for a date to start. Like if there's some code you want to be live for the Super Bowl, that code is in place in production for days or weeks before the Super Bowl starts. And then when the Super Bowl kicks off, boom, that switch is flipped, and then that code is live. So I've certainly seen from the development side that, hey, we coded all this stuff, but it's not allowed to go out in public. Can we just feature flag this? Can we just turn it off? And it's okay because there's no way of getting to it. So that stuff happens all the time. What I will say is, one, it seems like a necessary cautionary tale for the development industry, because it's much easier to feature flag something than it is to pull all the code out. And this is a perfect example of what happens when you get lazy like that. Like there was an operations director at Rockstar Games who warned the president, hey, this can't go out. But, they clearly didn't take that seriously, because there's some basic things that they could have done, like removing those images that were found by the modders, like the animations. They could have at the very least replaced those with files that contain nothing. And that's a relatively low impact thing to the code base to do, but they didn't, right? They got sloppy. And this happened. So I think it's totally legitimate. And it also seems like the president of Rockstar Games just seems like a person who was used to getting their own way when pushing boundaries.
I think you make some great points there, Phil, and I appreciate you sharing your technical expertise on that. I think that there was a moment where this could have been avoided. And that moment was when they're developing the PC and the Xbox versions. Because now you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. So the PS2 version, it's a read-only memory kind of thing. The modders couldn't exactly add things and put it onto the PS2 disc unless they're hard modding their PS2 and all that stuff. After the PS2 game comes out, they could have cut that out. There's no longer the big deadline restrictions that they had when they were doing it for the PS2 version. They could have cut that out of there, and the references might have still been in the code, but then it wouldn't have been able to access. There was a moment where Rockstar could have avoided this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And like in businesses are social constructs, and it's kind of based on whatever the social temperature is at that moment. The way I see it, and this is just my editorializing, who has the control? Do the developers and the people who come up with those fun concepts have the control? Or do the people who, keep back the barbarians at the gate, like your lawyers and your operations directors, do they have the final say, right? And this seems like a situation where the developers, I don't really feel like pulling out all of that code. Oh, that'll just create more headaches for us. And I really don't want to spend that time over the holidays. If that was an organization where the operations people and the regulatory people had more sway, those developers would have been working around the clock, nights and weekends, to pull that code out to still make the deadline. They didn't do that because the developers didn't feel like it.
Insights that I would have no idea about.
You're mentioning how they had all the time in the world to remove it.
Well, not all the time in the world, but...
Well, I mean, they did. They had extra time. I want to mention briefly that, you think about that amount of time they had for that release. They just re-released the game recently, and it was still left in. So how much time do they have then that they still left it in and had to shut everything down because that was one of the things that they forgot to remove, along with licensed music that they don't have licensing to anymore when they just re-released the game. So they had years and it still was left in.
Yeah, to say that the remastered version has been a rocky process is an understatement. But we'll talk a little bit. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that they still found hot coffee in the PC version.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that.
Still in there.
There are parts of it. Parts of it are still in. But we'll talk about that. With the media in a frenzy and video game opponents waving their torches and pitchforks, on July the 20th, 2005, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board announced the results of their investigation. The board concluded the sex minigame had been left in the retail versions of GTA San Andreas. They acknowledged that Rockstar took measures to make it inaccessible, and the only way you could access it was through a mod. However, according to the ESRB, the ability for people to mod the game to gain access to it undermined the integrity of the game's rating. As ESRB head Patricia Vance explained, quote, considering the existence of the undisclosed and highly pertinent content on the final discs, compounded by the broad distribution of the third-party modification, the credibility and utility of the initial ESRB rating has been seriously undermined. As a result, in an unprecedented move, the ESRB announced it was revoking the game's M rating, replacing it with the dreaded AO. The board also advised retailers to stop selling the game until Rockstar could, to put it mildly, unfuck it up. Now, it's important to note, however, that they did not say that Rockstar tricked the ESRB or gamed the system, despite what people like Jack Thompson and Hillary Clinton would have you believe. Rather, the fact that players had a means of accessing it, however unauthorized that access may be, made the minigame relevant for the ESRB to know about. I mean, thinking beyond this, it's like odds are that if the raiders had seen the content, the ESRB would probably have given GTA San Andreas an AO rating. And the thing is when a game gets handed a rating like an AO, like with film ratings, they can then go back and they can cut out the offending content, resubmit it, and it can be re-rated. You see that all the time in movies. So it's possible, again, they could have left it in and showed it to the ESRB, and it could have been avoided there. Now, it might have been a brief news story that they left it there, but then they could have gone back and just re-released it. So that could have happened. So there's a couple of places where what is happening now could have potentially been avoided. Now, all that said, you might be wondering what's going on at Rockstar and Take-Two through all of this. Behind closed doors, some like Sam Hauser were excited the sex minigame finally reached the light of day, with one programmer going so far as to say in an internal email the mod was, quote, better than an official patch, end quote. However, numerous Rockstar and Take-Two executives were less than enthused. There was also some finger pointing. When asked, Hauser asserted the controversial content needed to be kept in because removing it ran the risk that other parts of the game wouldn't work. However, some disagreed, including veteran programmer Gary Foreman, who later said cutting the content, quote, wouldn't take that long at all, not even days, end quote, and its continued inclusion was, this is his words, laziness pure and simple.
Phil, it sounds like you were right on the money, man.
Yep.
They just didn't think they would get caught, and they did. And it's important that a cautionary tale like this is out there.
Here's how they respond to this now. So Rockstar and Take-Two, that's their parent company, maintained radio silence until July the 13th. Again, the mod is released in early June. So what do we think they did? Let's do an ABC thing here. Did they A, come clean, explaining the mod unlocked cut content not accessible to the average user who didn't mess with the game's code? B, halt production and rush out patch versions of the game with the offending content removed? Or C, lie their asses off and throw the modding community under the bus?
I'm going to go with C.
They definitely should have done B.
Yes.
I'm going to follow Ryan and go with C.
What do you think, Phil? What's your vote?
I'm also going to follow the guy who's played all the Rockstar games.
Longtime listeners will know that whenever I offer a choice like that, the answer is always C.
Yes.
Rockstar denied any responsibility and claimed the sex minigame had been put into the game by hackers who appropriated and reused assets from GTA San Andreas to create the mod. According to their official statement, quote, so far we have learned that the hot coffee modification is the work of a determined group of hackers who have gone to significant trouble to alter scenes in the official version of the game. In violation of the software user agreement, hackers created the hot coffee modification by disassembling and then combining, recompiling, and altering the game's source code, end quote. Phil has his head in his hands. The company also promised to crack down on the modding community to ensure this thing that was totally not their fault never happened again.
It sounds political, though, for me, because let's say, hypothetically, they wanted to do this. The modding community is kind of eating it up. But if they come out, if they say something like, oh, we really wanted to do this despite what all of these anti-video game people say, they could put their company in a situation where they may not be able to produce any more of these games. And we definitely wanted more Rockstar games.
When they make that statement, the modding community, again, they remain firm. They say, this is in the game's content. We didn't alter anything. In the public forum, this means one of you people is lying. And so, and the thing is, gamers almost immediately pointed out that Rockstar was full of shit. Because if that were true, how did it get on the PS2 version, where people could play the sex minigame in all its glory by using an action replay? On July the 15th, after Rockstar makes a statement, Kotaku published the Action Replay Max codes for people to test it out for themselves. And 2 days later, GameSpot took them up on it, publishing a report wherein they unlocked Hot Coffee using an Action Replay Max and a sealed copy of the PS2 version. It very quickly was revealed that Rockstar was lying, that they were trying to throw the modders under the bus. However, with the rating change, Rockstar was finally forced to own up. Following the re-rating, they ceased production and gave retailers two options. Either they could keep selling the game with a new AO sticker, or they could send all their copies back to Rockstar until the game was patched. Now, most major retailers, including Walmart, Target, and Circuit City, chose to just send the game back. But here's what's interesting. Some retailers sold it anyway. For example, EB Games continued to carry the AO-rated version, although they kept it behind the counter and had people show ID before they could buy it. I will point out that even when Rockstar had to admit that the sex minigame had been on the disc the whole time, this did not stop them from trying to shift the blame anyway. After trying to blame it on hackers, they turned their finger pointing to the makers of cheat devices like GameShark and Action Replay. And in response, GameShark maker Mad Catz sued Take-Two in August of 2005. They're like, don't get us involved in this too. You're the ones who put it on there.
Yeah, we didn't make it. We just unlocked it.
Mad Catz eventually withdrew the suit on February the 16th, 2006, after they reached a non-monetary settlement with Take-Two. I feel like here is a good place to take a closer look at exactly how easy it was to access Hot Coffee. Because to hear Hillary Clinton and David Walsh and Leland Yee and Jack Thompson, the process was super easy, that it was just anybody could get to it. And I will tell you that news coverage of Hot Coffee really didn't help this. This was a lot of the public's first exposure to modding. And I got to think that more than a few reporters struggled to wrap their heads around it, let alone being able to present it in a way that makes sense to a public that largely has no concept of modding. As a result, you get a lot of reports that compare it to the closest thing that they could wrap their heads around, which were things like Easter eggs or cheat codes, leaving the impression that he only needed to enter a button combination or do a bunch of in-game things to get to Hot Coffee. For example, an Associated Press reporter commented in a July the 8th, 2005 article, quote, "Game designers have long tucked away hidden elements into their works, some meant to be found and others not. Several gaming magazines routinely publish codes that allow players to jump to various levels, keep endless supplies of bullets in first-person shooter games, or go into God mode, becoming invincible," end quote. However, accessing the Hot Coffee content was much more complicated than entering a couple of buttons. So I thought I'd offer you a brief rundown of how easy it was to access Hot Coffee. Now, as I mentioned before, the content was on the disc in all three versions of GTA San Andreas. However, each version requires different methods of unlocking it. And I will say, in my opinion, none of these options are as easy as putting the word porn or some specialized variant thereof, depending on your personal preferences, into Ask Jeeves or Lycos or whatever.
Yeah, whatever was available at the time.
If you wanted sex scenes, there were easier ways to do it, even in 2005.
Yeah, rent a movie.
But you get that's not the point either, right?
Yeah, I get it. I understand that. But like, what I'm going to say is like, all of these methods are not as easy as that. It involves a time and an interest in doing this. I should also point out, even if you did the methods of unlocking the content on your copy, you still needed to advance far enough in the game to gain access to the romance options in the first place, which can be hours, let alone getting the Hot Coffee invite. You need to open that feature in the game. It's a lot of missions to get to that point.
Yeah.
So let's go in ascending order of difficulty, starting with the PC version. PC version is probably the easiest. By all accounts, on the PC version, you just needed to download the mod, replace some files, then play far enough into the game to get to it, or download a save file far enough into the game to use it. Next up on the difficulty chain is probably the PS2 version. To access Hot Coffee on the PS2, you need to get an Action Replay Max, which you booted up and entered a long series of codes. However, most sites that I've seen that listed the codes, including the ones Kotaku posted, warned players that using the codes risk corrupting your save file. So you had to weigh whether or not seeing a 30-second sex scene is worth potentially losing dozens of hours of progress or back up your save file.
And I know those things can happen because you remember my copy of Smash Brothers where you can only be Mario.
Oh, I forgot about that. You want to tell me that story?
I forget what codes I used, but I had GameShark on it. And so it ended up where in the single player portion of Super Smash Bros., the original game, you could only pick Mario. You pick any character and you default to Mario because of the codes corrupting my cartridge. Yeah.
Nintendo had a notorious hatred of those cheat devices. They tried to sue them into oblivion in the early 90s. And ever since then, they would try to put all these fail safes that would wreck your game cartridge. And it seems like you were a victim of that.
Yeah, I think that's what happened.
Based on my research, the the original Xbox was by far the hardest platform to unlock hot coffee because everything I've read about it is you have to mod your system first before you can even attempt this. I can't speak for the state of the Xbox modding community scene in 2005. So I'll go on based on what I know about the modern ways to mod an Xbox. There are two ways to mod an Xbox: hard modding or soft modding. Hard modding requires you to get a mod chip. So you have to buy them online, and making sure you get it from a legitimate buyer, which is always a question, especially in 2005. You need to buy a mod chip. You need to physically open up your Xbox, and you had to install that mod chip onto the motherboard, in addition to doing a bunch of software stuff, which we'll talk about in a second. The other way is something called soft modding. And so soft modding involves exploiting commercial game files. So in the case of the Xbox, you have to exploit save files from very specific games. So today, the popular games for soft modding your original Xbox are Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell and certain versions of Mech Assault and 007 Agent Under Fire. So you'd have to get those games. And then in both cases, hard modding or soft modding, the player would then need to mod an Xbox memory card. Because remember, Xbox system, despite that hard drive, had a memory card. You would mod the memory card so that it could also be used as a USB flash drive. So it had to have the attachments. Now, today you can get an adapter online fairly easily, but I believe in those days you had to physically manipulate your memory card to do this. And then you had to download specific files, put them on this modded memory card, put that in your Xbox, boot that up through one of these specific games so that it would run a certain file that would soft mod the game. And then you could then download the hot coffee stuff, put it on your Xbox, boot up your copy of GTA San Andreas, and go through far enough in this game to do that. You had to do all of that. So none of this is easy, regardless of what system you're using.
It just seems like a lot of work.
Yeah. All of this to say is that while it is doable on all systems, it is complicated and time consuming and can either risk ruining your save file or, in the case of hard modding your Xbox, physically ruining your system. It took a few weeks for Rockstar to finally roll out the new copies of GTA San Andreas. The patch for the PC version released on August the 12th through the website nomorehotcoffee.com. New versions of the PS2 and Xbox versions returned to store shelves in October. And henceforth, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas players, at last freed of the possible chance of engaging in and consummating a digital relationship, can return to wholesome activities like running over pedestrians and tagging cops with spray paint till they died.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I remember you could do that.
By this time, the media frenzy had largely died down, and many of video games' rogues gallery had moved on to other fights. Even Jack Thompson had moved on by then. Fall 2005 was a busy time for old Jack. Thompson had to prepare for his wrongful death lawsuit against Rockstar and Take-Two because he claimed Grand Theft Auto was responsible for the deaths of 3 police officers in Fayette, Alabama, a case he would eventually get kicked off for sending daily harassing messages to his opposing counsel. He was also busy commissioning a video game in which all of his personal enemies were brutally killed. For both those and more, see our 2-part series on Jack Thompson. However, this didn't mean Rockstar or Take-Two were completely out of the woods over hot coffee, and the company spent years managing the fallout. For example, several state and federal lawmakers used hot coffee as a pretense for more laws regulating the ESRB and the games industry. On September the 14th, 2005, a bill banning the sale or rental of, quote, ultra-violent explicit games, end quote, to minors passed in Michigan. The Leonese bill passed in California, signed into law by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger on October the 7th, 2005. Both of these laws would eventually be thrown out in the courts for violating free speech, with the California law eventually making it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And for more on that, see our Brown v. EMA episode. There were also at least 2 attempts to regulate video games on the federal level. On December the 16th, 2005, Hillary Clinton, Joe Lieberman, and several other members of Congress introduced the Family Entertainment Protection Act, a bill that made it illegal to sell or rent any M, AO, or unrated game to minors, with violators subject to fines and or community service. The bill also gave the Federal Trade Commission enforcement power over the ESRB, subjecting the ratings board to annual reviews. It also allowed people to independently file complaints against video games they felt were improperly rated, a system that people like Jack Thompson would definitely never abuse. This one ended up dying in committee. Speaking of the Federal Trade Commission, in response to pressure from lawmakers, on July the 25th, 2005, the Federal Trade Commission opened an investigation into whether Rockstar and Take-Two had misled customers. About a year later, on July the 8th, 2006, Take-Two reached a settlement with the Federal Trade Commission. The commission issued no penalties, made no accusations of wrongdoing. However, it advised Take-Two to ensure its content was transparent in the future, a penalty of an $11,000 fine per incident. So this is pretty much a slap on the wrist. On September the 26th, 2006, we're not done with the laws about this one. U.S. Senator Sam Brownback, a Republican from Kansas, introduced the Truth in Video Game Rating Act, which which barred the ESRB from rating a game unless raters had carefully examined all of a game's content, including all of its hidden code. Brownback's laughably impractical bill failed so hard it didn't even make it to committee.
That's so much more work for the reviewers.
Exactly.
Like, I highly doubt the reviewers are computer programmers.
Think about how these things are making it to the review board. Rockstar Games is behind schedule. They're trying to make the holiday sales push. They get it to the ESRB at the 11th hour. And please, can you do us a solid and review this game in 45 minutes?
The size of today's programs, the teams of people they would need in order to accomplish that.
Imagine having to rate Skyrim on that measure.
Fallout 4 and any of those kind of games.
Yeah, there's no way this would work. And people at the time pointed out that this was a dumb idea because this one wasn't even referred to committee. Usually they get that. However, it's likely that folks at Rockstar and Take-Two had more important things to worry about. On the one hand, hot coffee turned out to be pretty expensive for parent company Take-Two. During a quarterly earnings report on September the 7th, 2005, Take-Two announced it had set aside $33 million to handle the recall. We'll talk about in a minute exactly how much it cost. So that kind of stuff combined with a weak sales year overall for Take-Two forced the company to scale back its earnings estimates, which stockholders, love, and their stock started tumbling. So the company every year is going to report its losses. In the quarter of April of 2005, so right before this happens, the company had reported $8.2 million in losses. A year later, in April of 2006, they reported $50.4 million in losses.
Wow.
So this combined with all the other stuff hit them pretty hard in terms of finances. The heavy costs that Take-Two incurred during this time resulted in the closure of 3 studios. Frog City, Indie Built, and Rockstar Vienna were all closed as a result of the heavy losses Take-Two had during this time. Oh, did I mention all the fraud? Because when Hot Coffee dropped, Take-Two was also involved in a lot of shady financial shit, and they were constantly being investigated by the feds. On June the 9th, 2005, the same day Patrick Wildenberg released the Hot Coffee mod, Take-Two announced the settlement with the Securities and Exchange Commission. According to the SEC, 4 Take-Two executives conducted a scheme where they arranged for hundreds of thousands of copies of their games to be shipped to distributors with no intention of selling them so that the company could report the games as sales on their quarterly reports and then quietly take the games back. This is a practice known as parking. There's another term for that. Accounting fraud. And Take-Two ended up paying $7.5 million in penalties. On February the 14th, 2007, the SEC reached a $6.3 million settlement with former Take-Two CEO Ryan Brandt, whom the commission charged with illegally backdating Take-Two's stock. 2 months later, the SEC opened another investigation into Take-Two for stock fraud. And in April of 2009, the company again had to pay millions of dollars in penalties. So Hot Coffee kind of came at a bad time for them with all the financial malfeasance. And this was on top of all the lawsuits. Wow. Hot Coffee led to not 1, not 2, but 3 lawsuits against Rockstar and Take-Two. The first one came a week after the ESRB handed down the AO rating, when Florence Cohen, an 85-year-old grandma from New York, filed a class action lawsuit accusing Rockstar and Take-Two of, quote, engaging in false, misleading, and deceptive practices, unquote, by leaving in its naughty, naughty content. Reportedly, Cohen had bought a copy of the M-rated game for her then 14-year-old grandson, only to snatch it away from him when she learned it wasn't age appropriate. I guess the M rating was no indication to her. And that was before even figuring out that Hot Coffee stuff may or may not have been on that disc. That's got to be a sucky Christmas. Grandma buys you the game you've been wanting all this time. So, oh, great. Oh, this is awesome, Grandma. Wait a minute. What's that letter? Taking it away. No! So that was the first lawsuit. The second lawsuit came on January the 26th, 2006, when the Los Angeles County Attorney's Office accused Rockstar and Take-Two of, quote, engaging in unfair business practices by hiding pornographic material in a game which received an M rating, end quote. The Attorney's Office called upon Take-Two to surrender any profits made from the game, as well as pay a $2,500 fine for any false statements made by company officials about the game in the past.
But like in that lawsuit, did they hide pornographic content in the game? You can make a legitimate case if they did. And did Rockstar Games lie in public statements? We just went over the fact that they did. So both of those things are true. Like the spirit of the lawsuits is debatable, but I think that lawsuit itself is fairly legitimate.
Yeah, it's legitimate because those things happened. Was it necessarily out of malice? We don't know, but they did happen.
All of this history that Kevin is filling us in on, though, does kind of skew one's perception of Rockstar. Rockstar. If they are avidly trying to find ways to fraudulently make money, it would make me think that they wouldn't try to release this and cause this debacle for themselves intentionally just to allow the world to have access to this mod.
Yeah, the one thing I know about Rockstar is they're all about the money. That is their main motivator. Because if you want something to get fixed that's broken in one of their games, it better be something that's costing them money. Otherwise, it's not getting fixed.
Yeah, I think all that's fair enough. And there were plenty of people, even in the gaming community, who thought it was pretty scummy that Rockstar threw the modders under the bus, and the fact that they came out and lied. And the only reason they actually admitted to this was after the ESRB had weighed in. And I think that goes into your point, Ryan, because then that starts affecting their money.
Yeah. And even after the community was rallying behind them and like taking it down and discouraging people from looking for it and like trying to help them, they then throw them under the bus after that and made it even worse.
And if Wildenborg hadn't put it out, someone else would have. It was there.
Someone would have found it and unlocked it.
There was no denying it was there. And like knowing the modding community, it wasn't an if it would be found, it was going to be a when. So the third and final lawsuit came a few weeks later on February the 14th, 2006, when Take-Two shareholder John Feniger sued the company, accusing Rockstar and Take-Two of deliberately trying to sneak pornographic content by the ESRB, thereby dodging an AO rating and thereby misrepresenting the profit potential of the game, and thereby artificially inflating the company's stock value. As the suit explained, quote, unbeknownst to investors, defendants engaged in an undisclosed illegal and fraudulent scheme to bolster sales of the game by including hidden pornographic content that was triggered by downloading a third-party program from the internet called Hot Coffee. Defendants concealed the hidden sex scenes so they could get the video game onto the shelves of major retailers that otherwise refused to carry products containing sexual content, end quote.
I think I've been upfront about what I think happened. They tried to hide it. They were lazy about it. And this came back to bite them in ways they couldn't have possibly imagined. That having been said, just because I don't think that's what happened doesn't mean that I don't think that lawsuit is legitimate or that it wasn't enrolled of the plaintiff.
This lawsuit gets more complicated too, because the cities of New York and Flint, Michigan were eventually brought in as plaintiffs because both cities had invested in thousands of shares in Take-Two as part of their respective cities' municipal pension funds.
Wow.
They were brought in as co-plaintiffs on this because they were some of the people who lost the most money when the stock started to tank.
Mm-hmm.
All of this really didn't sit well with Take-Two's investors because a hard and fast rule in gaming is that when it comes to shareholders, you can practically get away with murder so long as you keep making the money. I call this the Bobby Kotick rule. On March the 28th, 2007, during Take-Two's annual shareholders meeting, a group of shareholders ousted 5 of the 6 members of Take-Two's board of directors, including their CEO, Paul Eibler, citing Hot Coffee, gross mismanagement, and the SEC and Federal Trade Commission investigations as several reasons why they felt they shouldn't be in charge anymore.
Hey there, fellow netizens. Kevin here in the editor's chair with a brief addendum because I don't think I sufficiently addressed the personnel changes related to Hot Coffee at Rockstar or Take-Two during our original recording. First, before the shareholders ousted Take-Two's CEO and most of its board of directors, another board member resigned over Hot Coffee. On January the 25th, 2006, Barbara A. Kaczynski resigned from Take-Two's board of directors. Kaczynski, who was also chair of the company's audit committee, cited Hot Coffee and the SEC investigations as the reasons for her departure. As for Rockstar, in the years following Hot Coffee, several key people, including co-founders Jamie King, Terry Donovan, and Gary Foreman, all left the company. However, as far as I can tell, there were no firings at Rockstar directly related to the Hot Coffee scandal. Also, while I'm here, I want to briefly acknowledge David Kushner's book Jacked, the unauthorized behind-the-scenes story of Grand Theft Auto, as an influential source in my research. Anyway, back to the recording.
All the major players, guys like Sam Houser, they kept their jobs. All of this for one of some clothed polygons to rub up against each other.
Oh my God.
This brings up a really important question, is just how much did Hot Coffee cost Rockstar and Take-Two? I bring this up because a lot of the accounts I read online about Hot Coffee will talk about how much it cost them. The number I see circulate around the internet is this cost the company about $20 million. And that figure comes from a settlement that Take-Two reached in the stockholders lawsuit. On September the 1st, 2009, they settled the stockholders lawsuit for $20.1 million. Of that $20 million, Take-Two paid out about $5 million, and the other $15 was covered by their insurance. But that doesn't really paint the whole picture of how much this cost, because there are a lot of things you got to factor into this. So the cost of recalling the game, patching it, reissuing all those copies, all their legal costs, attorneys' fees, settlement payouts, things like that, possible lost sales from consumers or retailers, the damage it did to their stocks, and like intangibles like the loss of staff members who left or were ousted during the scandal, and the fact that Take-Two closed 3 studios because of this. Not all of that was Hot Hot Coffee, but Hot Coffee was a significant factor contributing to that. So I mentioned that the $20 million figure comes from one of the lawsuits. Why don't we talk about the other ones? Now, I don't have much evidence of what happened with the Los Angeles Attorney's Office lawsuit. If people have found stuff that they can send to me, scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. But I do have information on Florence Cohen's lawsuit, our 85-year-old grandma who courageously snatched away that Christmas present from her grandson and then proceeded to sue Rockstar. On January the 28th, 2008, Take-Two settled, but there's a catch in this one. People who felt that they were affected by Hot Coffee had to file individual claims with Take-Two. So they would go to a website and they had to fill out a form that said, okay, I bought this game. I felt personally impacted by this content and I would like compensation. They had a scale by which they would do this. So if you had proof of purchase, so you had a receipt that you bought the game, you were entitled to a whole $35. If you could provide no proof that you own the game or purchased the game, but you felt offended by it, you were entitled to 5 big ones. Ooh, $5.
I take that $5.
Now, you want to guess how much money Take-Two actually paid out?
$20,000.
Let's see. I'm gonna go with 50,000.
What do you think, Phil?
$2 million?
Elford's the closest. They paid out about $27,000.
Wow.
Because what you're talking about is like people actually have to get up and do something to get this
That's
money.
true. That's true. You have to actually work. You do some work to get it.
There was that. Some people did it because of that. Some people did it out of solidarity for Rockstar. They're like, we weren't offended by this. This is nonsense. So yeah, only about $27,000. So apparently this was on top of about $2.9 million in legal fees and charitable donations that Take-Two reportedly paid to help make the suit go away. As for the cost of recalling, patching, and sending out the new Hot Coffee free versions of GTA, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Take-Two set aside about $33 million to handle that. And according to a 2006 report, the recall ended up costing them about $24.5 million. Those are some of the more concrete costs we know about. There are other costs that are a lot less clean cut. You got to think like the hits they took in stocks. How much of that was just Hot Coffee when they were mired in fraud investigations? You know, what other games were underperforming? Because one of those that would other games weren't selling as well. How much would investors have put up if it was just Hot Coffee and not all those other things? Like, we'll never know. Another thing is, how much did Take-Two need to pay out in severance packages to guys like Paul Eibler and the rest of the board of directors when they get ousted? Because, you know, they got to have their golden parachutes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now, when all this went down, a July the 22nd, 2005 GameSpot report speculated just the lost revenue on retail sales after recalling and reissuing new copies. They estimate that would cost about $50 million. I think with all these other things, it probably cost them a lot more than that overall. And all for want of killing people with dildos and chronic masturbation.
Yes.
It's got to be in
Must remain in.
It must remain in. But you know
what?
what?
His way to write that next to that entry. It must remain in.
But you know what? Let's not dwell on the money. At least Rockstar could laugh at themselves. No, ultimately Rockstar was fine. Take-Two was fine. They're still making games.
To be fair, they're making a game.
Yeah.
They're not making games for, they're making a game repeatedly.
Let's fast forward to 2008. With their follow-up game to San Andreas, Grand Theft Auto 4 released for the PS3, the Xbox, and the PC. Like his predecessor CJ, main character Nico Bellic could also romance potential girlfriends who, after a successful date, can invite him up for coffee. Like the patch San Andreas, the player is only treated to a street view and some suggestive moans. However, the first time this happens in the game, the player earns an achievement, cheekily named Warm Coffee.
Warm coffee.
Okay. The game takes place in Liberty City. It's Rockstar stand-in for New York, which is complete with its own analog for the Statue of Liberty called the Statue of Happiness. Instead of a torch, the Statue of Happiness holds aloft a cup of coffee, and its face bears a striking resemblance to Hillary Clinton.
Yes, it does.
This story kind of started with hubris and laziness, and I think it's where I'll end it. And Ryan, you alluded to this before. So some of you may know that on November the 11th, 2021, Rockstar released Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the definitive edition, a pack that included huge air quotes remastered versions of GTA 3, Vice City, and San Andreas. To say the release has been rocky is a huge understatement, with the pack riddled with huge frame rate drops, messy visuals, and tons of bugs, adding to the company's mostly self-inflicted miseries. On November the 12th, 2021, Rockstar announced they were pulling the PC version because, according to a post on the company Twitter, they had to, quote, remove files unintentionally included in these versions, end quote, which led many to speculate that in Rockstar's haste to rush out these so-called definitive editions, that they inexplicably let hot coffee in again.
And they did.
I do have some closure for this, Ryan, though.
Okay.
On November the 13th, 2021, data miners reported that there were references to hot coffee left in the code of the definitive edition. However, the nude sprites and sex animations were no longer there.
They did what was suggested earlier, I guess, and just removed the content that the code was referencing, so you couldn't actually see it.
16 years later.
It finally did what they should have done in the beginning.
Let's wrap this thing up. Final thoughts on Grand Theft Auto Hot Coffee.
So obviously this is just my opinion. I'm not saying anybody should do any of this stuff, but opposing the modding community is a bad way to go as a game maker because modders generally increase engagement with games. So game manufacturers should expect that modders are going to be a part of their play base and that some basic data mining and modding is going to be done on every popular game. So if you want to put in a risky feature into your product, at the very least, talk to your operations staff and legal and whoever before you build it. If you build a feature and you have to disable the feature but still release the code, you have to account for the possibility that somebody might find that code. And if the ramifications of somebody finding that code are bad, you should not release it even if it's hidden. You should pull that code. And definitely, if you get caught, don't lie about what happened in a way that's clearly easy to disprove because as we all know, the cover-up is worse than the crime.
I have a question. I know you haven't done the episode yet on the rating system. Do you know if it's changed at all since? I'm wondering if today, if that was left in, would it get an AO or would it be an N? Is what I'm wondering.
That's a good question. So this did change some things with ESRB. One thing that changed was that beginning in 2006, ESRB raters used to be a part-time job. They now made it a full-time position. So they're professionals who actually actively rate games. The other thing that happened was the ESRB tried to bring in penalties for sneaking stuff by. So June the 19th, 2006, Patricia Vance, who's the head of the ESRB, issued a statement warning game makers that any other attempt, real or perceived, to circumvent or undermine the rating system could lead to fines up to $1 million. So the ESRB began threatening people with fines. As far as I can tell, only one other game had this happen where the ESRB went in, found something that might have been illicit or inappropriate, and changed the rating after the fact. Anybody want to guess what the game was? I was surprised by this one.
I feel like I should know it, but I don't.
Manhunt.
Oh, we'll get to Manhunt one day. Believe me, we'll get to Manhunt. No, it wasn't Manhunt. Oblivion. So on the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, people started looking a lot more carefully into the content of various games. And on May the 3rd, 2006, the ESRB announced it was re-rating Oblivion from T to M as the ESRB reassessed the game's violence and also uncovered a sprite of a topless woman that was left in the code. And so under fear that could be accessed by modders, they changed that rating from a T to an M. So there were some changes to the ESRB after this.
My question was because, it's also a game that's no stranger to controversies, but Cyberpunk has a lot of stuff in it that seems like it's much worse than this hot coffee. And it's not like it's side missions, like main story stuff. Where there's full-on first-person sex scenes in the game content. And it's rated M. It's not an AOA game. So that's why I'm just wondering if any of that's changed. Like, I feel like if none of this happened and that game were to come out today with that hot coffee as it was, I feel like it would have just been rated M.
I think you're talking about like both what the ERB is doing, but also like the grand scheme of how we're viewing video games in general. Because 20 years ago when grandma went to the video game store and she bought the rated M game and gave it to the 7-year-old kid, right? She's upset. And we're asking, the game is rated M. Why did you get it for the kid? But nowadays, when you have a 40-year-old man playing video games, right. I think rated M, this is for me, this is not for my children. And
right.
So for me, I don't mind if it has reality in it because I'm an adult. Right. Maybe they should clarify by making a new rating called "This is only for adults."
Yeah. I mean, they could just leave the ratings as they are, just not put such a stigma on the AO one where no one sells it. You know what I mean? Like, just make whatever games they want to make and sell them.
That's interesting. Also, something that's educational for me, as many as 15 years ago, the rating system meant if this game has an M on it, only bad parents buy these games for their kids. Like, that's what the M means. You're a bad person if you buy this. Whereas now it's like the size of a shirt. Am I a small, a medium, or a large? Am I a kid? I buy kids games. Am I an adult? I buy adult games.
I think you all make a good point there. And I think one of the big things that's changed, and Elford, you pointed this out, is a lot of the concern over hot coffee when it comes out is not so much just the existence of it, but that kids could get to it. That's a lot of the rhetoric, is that this is easily accessible to children. My children are going to see it. Your children are going to see it, things like that. Because I feel like Grand Theft Auto is a series that comes out really as a formative period in the identity of gaming in the public, because a lot of the perception is still that games are for children. And that's a lot of where the message of people like Jack Thompson, Lily, and Hillary Clinton are coming from. These are things that could be potentially dangerous to kids. They're not thinking about adult players. Adult players don't factor into it. And I think what's changed now is that we've talked about this on the show before. And Phil, you very eloquently put this in the past, of gaming is ubiquitous now. It's part of the monoculture. From young children to middle-aged people are playing games now. And I think that there's an acknowledgement that the medium in that respect has grown up. It's established. It's not going anywhere. And that there are adults who play it. And I think that a lot of what the industry was grappling with when it was coming to things like laws banning access to games and stuff was the relationship of adults to gaming. And Grand Theft Auto in general had kind of pushed a lot of those envelopes to see, we're going to do more violent, we're going to do more sexual content. And you can see where like guys like Sam Houser says, like, this is not for kids. This is an adult game. I think a lot of that is that stigma about what they were. And some of that doesn't help that they were associated with being not just frivolous, but also just something that children did. And I think that's what changed. And I think you're right, Ryan. I think that if they were going to put something like that now, then yeah, that wouldn't be that big of a deal, because they understand that there's a market for adults. And I also appreciate your point, Ryan, and I think you made this, but Phil, I don't see a reason why there couldn't be more AO games, and there couldn't be more games that are specifically for those kinds of audiences. I think that with video game sales being so much more decentralized, that I think you're going to see more AO games, just because, like, if you're an independent developer in 1995 or 2004 is an example, when Grand Theft Auto San Andreas comes out, if you're not in Best Buy, if you're not in Target, if you're not in Circuit City, you're nothing. You're not going to sell anything. There's no digital distribution, at least the way it is now. But like now, if you're an indie developer, you could sell it on your website and not have to worry about the middle ground of a retailer. And like Steam will sell AO games. Steam sells Hatred. Future episode, we'll talk about Hatred. And so I think that there's more of a market and more of an audience for that stuff. And I see no reason, and I gotta have no specific objections to games that have that kind of content. And I could see in the future that being more of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, as long as nobody's getting exploited or hurt, make whatever sort of content you want.
If you look at it on the time scale, I believe you said 2002 just came out. Is that right?
It originally comes out in 2004 and the mod comes out in 2005.
2004. Sopranos comes out in 1999 and it runs for 6 years. So it's overlapping Sopranos, which was one of the most popular television programs at the time that really blew up what people wanted. The Sopranos were everywhere. It was just a hugely popular show. And Grand Theft Autos, in some ways, is the Sopranos story. You know, it's some way you're part of the counterculture. Mobsters, some of them are mobsters. There's the mob, there's all that stuff. It's all there. It's just a different medium. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about.
Speaking of media, The Sopranos was on HBO, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
and it's rated TVMA.
Exactly. I think there's more of a societal understanding of how HBO is not for kids and less of an understanding that not every video game is for children.
I think that's why it's different now, because there's more, like we were saying, there's more of an understanding that not all games are for kids. Whereas then you were just starting to get these sort of titles, and that grandma who bought the game only knew of video games as a kid's thing. So why would this game not be for my grandson? Despite what it says on the box, he should be able to play it. There shouldn't be anything questionable in there, even though he shouldn't, by rating, be playing it.
To give Rockstar some credit, despite their shenanigans and their fraud, etc., I have known them to have produced really excellent games and really pushed the bar on what we could do with video games. And they've done it in different ways. And so I remain appreciative of what they've done.
Yes, the storytelling alone of some of the games they put out. GTA 5 story is just, it's like a movie that you play. Red Dead 2, it's a cowboy western movie that you play through. They know how to do that really well.
Yeah, I think ultimately we're seeing, again, this is that transitionary period for gaming when they're not quite grown up yet, but they're starting to get in that direction, and that causes anxiety. It's a formative period. I joked before that Grand Theft Auto crawled so that Saints Row could walk, and that it created an environment where games could eventually be to the point where they could push these kinds of boundaries. As we know, Rockstar Rockstar learned all of its lessons and never made any mistakes that pissed off the fan community or seemed like that they were cutting corners ever again.
Yeah, I don't think that's possible.
And that'll do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating on iTunes. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seekwe by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NC SA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
I'm Elford Stephens.
Bill Thomas.
And I'm Ryan Weaver. Thanks for having me today, guys.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next Scandal.